was only a dime, who could give up a half a day's work in order to complain about that? You were on the bus because you didn't have a car, because you didn't have anything. So the bus drivers could laugh. They were crazy. And it made everybody a little crazier. She got on at the back of the bus, and the back section of the bus is 36 rows. The back is black, the white is front. We got the middle section, 2 in the middle are going to be the neutral zone. She looked around, and of course, there were no seats. So she looked to the middle, and there was a man sitting in the neutral zone. He's sitting on the window. She sat down next to him. I had the pleasure for 20 years of knowing Mrs. Parks, a little over 20 years actually. And of course, you know a cultural icon like that, there's no sense in asking them anything because they tell you what they want you to know. If they haven't told you, they don't care. They don't want you to know. But I did have to ask her one question because it ate me up. I still want to know. I said, Miss Parks, I never remember reading who was sitting next to you on the bus that day. And she said, oh, baby. And I tell you, she called everybody baby. I thought it was special, but it's not true. She called everybody baby. She said, oh, baby, I don't remember. And I said, Miss Parks, tell me you're not going to tell me. I understand that. You're not going to tell me you don't remember, because only 30,000 Negroes in Montgomery, and you know. So I'm not going for that. But she never did. But he was on the window. When James Tate came and said, give me those seats, he decided to get up. We do recall it was Thursday, December the 1st. In those days, you got what was called a payout envelope, the Eagle. Those of us who know our blues. The Eagle flies on Friday, and Saturday I go out to play. Hello. So this man on Thursday, if he doesn't give up his seat, is risking arrest. He would get a payout envelope, which if he is not there to get it, he's risking not getting it. This man has a wife. This man has children. He has a mother, maybe a mistress. I don't want to judge. But he needs his money. So he says to Mrs. Parks, I'm going to get up. I'm not going to fight this. I do want to give him credit for not trying to encourage her. He said, this is what I have to do. You do what you have to do. It's a good thing. Because if he had stayed there, it would have been a different kind of movement. A different thing would have happened. The 2 men on the other side of the aisle got up and gave the seats. James Tate, when he saw Mrs. Parks get up, thought that she had complied with an illegal and immoral request. And he turned around to go drive the bus. When he sat back down and looked at his mirror, he saw that she had sat back down. And he said, I'm going to have you arrested. She said with that quiet strength, you may do that. Because she knew that she had encountered her moment. As we know, Mrs. Parks was arrested, and they called E.D. Nixon, Edgar David Nixon, who was the head of the NAACP, who was also a film reporter. And we called, E.D. was working in his yard. And he did what he needed to do, which was so key. He went upstairs and took a bath, because he didn't want to go down to bail her out, not properly dressed. Put on his suit, put on a white shirt, and put on his tie. And he called Clifford Drewer, who was married to a wonderful woman named Virginia Drewer, who, as fate would have it, or God, or however we look at these things, was the sister, of course, of Hugo Black. And Clifford Drewer went down with E.D. Nixon and got Mrs. Parks out. Her trial was set, as we know, for that Monday, that'd be December 4th. A wonderful woman named Joanne Robinson, speaking of English department people, head of the English department at Alabama State, which is the land grant school, the black school in Alabama, had just been elected the head of the Women's Political Caucus, and she said, when she heard that Mrs. Parks was arrested, she said, let's have a boycott, let's support Mrs. Parks. It's time that we stop being disrespected on the buses. The women went out and met her at 10 o'clock at night. They took Alabama's materials and they ran off something like 30,000 flyers. And they passed them around. Now, when you hear about the Montgomery bus boycott, you hear it quite accurately that the preachers announced on Sunday that there would be a boycott. But if we had waited till Sunday, and if we had waited till the preachers announced it, nobody would have known. Because half the time the preachers were preaching to people who had cars. So though they supported the boycott, they weren't doing it. We needed to get to the people in the juke joints. And that's what they did. They got it around so that the word got around. Monday morning, when the buses rolled at 6 o'clock, no one was on it. Monday afternoon, no one was on it. And they agreed to meet at Holt Street Baptist Church and have a mass meeting. And it's going to be at this mass meeting that we're going to meet one of the great people of the 20th century. We're going to meet Martin Luther King Jr. Martin was just 26 years old. He was a kid. He knew when he walked up to that, it wasn't a podium, but to the thing there, he knew that the clock was ticking. He knew that he was not going to die in bed of old age. He knew that he was probably not going to see his grandchildren because he knew the country in which he lived, and he knew that he was putting his life on the line. But he did that for the good of us all, for the good of the country, for the good of the planet, for the good of humanity. Martin decided to stand up. I wrote a poem on Mrs. Parks' 80th birthday that I'd like to share as we go into Martin. This is for the Pullman porters who organized when people said they couldn't and carried the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender to the South so that the people there would know they were not alone. This is for the Pullman porters who helped Thurgood Marshall go south and come back north to fight the fight that resulted in Brown versus Board of Education. This is for the Pullman porters who whispered to the traveling men, both the blues men and the race men, so that they both would know what was going on. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled as if they were happy and laughed like they were tickled when some folks were around, and who silently rejoiced in 1954 when the Supreme Court announced its 9-0 decision that separate is inherently unequal. This is for the Pullman porters who smiled and welcomed a 14-year-old boy onto their train in 1955. They noticed his slight limp that he tried to disguise with a doo-wop walk. They noticed his stutter and probably understood why his mother wanted him out of Chicago during the summer when school was out. 14-year-old black boys with limps and stutters are apt to try to prove themselves in dangerous ways when mothers aren't around to look after them. So this is for the Pullman porters who looked over that 14-year-old while the train rolled the reverse of the Blues Highway, from Chicago to St. Louis to Memphis to Mississippi. This is for the men who kept him safe. And if Emmett Till had been able to stay on that train all summer, he would have maybe grown a bit of a paunch, certainly lost his hair, probably worn bifocals, and bounced his grandchildren on his knee, telling them about the summer ride on the rails. But he had to get off that train and ended up in muddy Mississippi and was horribly, brutally, inexcusably, and unacceptably murdered. This is for the Pullman porters who, when the sheriff was trying to get the body secretly buried, got Emmett's body on the northbound train, got his body home to Chicago, where his mother said, "I want the world to see what they did to my boy." And this is for all the mothers who cried, and this is for all the people who said, "Never again." And this is about Rosa Parks, whose feet were not so tired. It had been, after all, an ordinary day until the bus driver gave her the opportunity to make history. This is about Mrs. Rosa Parks from Tuskegee, Alabama, who was also the field secretary of the NAACP. This is about the moment Rosa Parks shouldered her cross, put her worldly goods aside, was willing to sacrifice her life so that that young man in Money, Mississippi, who had been so well protected by the Pullman porters, would not have died in vain. When Mrs. Parks said no, a passionate movement was begun. No longer would there be a reliance on the law. There was a higher law. When Mrs. Parks brought that light of hers to expose the evil of the system, the sun came and rested on her shoulders, bringing the heat and light of truth. Others would follow Mrs. Parks. 4 young men in Greensboro, North Carolina, would also say no. Great voices would be raised, singing the praises of God and exhorting us to forgive those who trespassed against us. But it was the Pullman porters who safely got Emmett to his granduncle, and it was Mrs. Rosa Parks who could not stand that death. And in not being able to stand it, she sat back down. I grew up in a part of Cincinnati. It's called Lincoln Heights. It's actually the valley. At one point, Ohio was going to dig a canal from Lake Erie all the way down to the Ohio River, move barge goods, which is still actually a good idea considering the energy crisis and stuff like that. But the kids in my neighborhood